mean, learning a new language, especially as an adult, is tricky, right? There's a lot to pick up, and we bring a lot of our sort of our regular learning capabilities to language learning when we're doing that as an adult as opposed to learning it as a child. So I think it's helpful to consciously think about some things that you wouldn't normally think about consciously if you're learning language as a child.
Uh-huh.
And part of that is that language is more than, just the sounds and the words and the structures. If you really want to be proficient in a language to the point that you can interact in all different kinds of contexts, you also need to learn the social parts of language as well.
Yeah.
So part of that could be subsumed under pragmatics to know, how somebody might be indirectly asking you a favor or
Sure.
indirectly giving you a compliment or insulting you or something like that. It may not be just the meanings of the words, right? You have to understand that context better. But then also, um, and this usually requires a fairly high level of proficiency. You're not going to get all of this in a, 101 class, right? But to be able to understand how people use language in different contexts to represent who they are, how you might hear particular forms that your friends would use particular forms, but none of that was ever in your textbook. And why is that? Well, because maybe your textbook was teaching a very sort of proper academic variety of the language, which isn't necessarily appropriate when you're just hanging out with friends. And maybe different groups of friends might speak differently. If we think about how we do that in our native language, I think that can be kind of helpful. Again, do you speak with your friends differently from the way you might speak with a professor? Probably, right? You know, otherwise it might be a little weird in both contexts.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that we do that in a native language can kind of help us zero in on some of that in a foreign language or a second language as well. Recognize that some of those social factors that are relevant in our native language might also be relevant in the second language. So things like socioeconomic class or gender.
Mm.
Then women might use the language differently from the way men use it in particular contexts. So that's something to be aware of, and how people might use language to express solidarity within a particular group. So groups of friends might have their own sort of inside jokes and those sorts of things. But also it could reflect, your ethnicity or your neighborhood or any of those sorts of things. Sometimes even your hobbies can affect the way you speak, right?
Sure.
So all of that can be this extra layer that's added on to your regular language learning. This is the sort of thing that's hard to get from books. um, you might be able to observe some of this if you're watching media, either from social media or movies or something,
Mm.
but you really have to learn those sorts of things through interaction by actually talking with people, um, just the way you would learn them in your native language as well.
And how does one, like you said, to like consume media, but like do you have like certain two things? First of all, do you have any examples of in things in Korea that you noticed, or in Nauru that you noticed as well that's totally different from the Western American worldview? Was one, and second, how should one be more, I would say, aware of things to pick up? Like, is there like a things like, okay, social class or um religion or things that you need to pick up, like, okay, with this group you deal like this, or you use this kind of language.
Right. Okay. So the first one was about.
Korea, like if you had any.
Yes. So I will say that one really hard thing for me to learn as a Korean language learner um, has to do with these honorifics and different levels of formality and respect that you show for different people. Korean society historically has been hierarchical and in ways that I wouldn't expect coming from an English speaking, American context. Even younger siblings um, have different words for older siblings than their younger siblings. Like
Hmm.
there's one word that means dongseng is just a younger sibling of any gender, but there's a different word for a girl's older brother, a boy's older brother, and a girl's older sister and a boy's older sister, for example. And there can be so hierarchies even at that level. And of course, you'd speak to a grandfather differently from the way you would speak, to a sibling. And the level of respect you show for a teacher is quite different from what you
Really?
have here. And the linguistic forms, the way they interact can be quite complicated. Um, there are some things that I certainly learned and could use, to some extent, but I don't know if I could ever get that same level of competence that somebody could have if they're growing up in that society. You have to understand how the society's functioning as well as how all of these detailed grammatical features work together. You know, so am I going to use this honorific um, verb to talk about how my grandmother is eating? As opposed to the verb I would use for my younger sibling eating, for example. Um, would I use this honorific subject marker versus this sort of basic general subject marker? So those things can be quite confusing. Oh. Yeah, does that answer
Yeah.
kind of what you were
Yeah.
asking about?
Yeah, it does. It just reminded me 2 examples. So, my WhatsApp message has become a corpus in of itself that I like to search, for the instances of things, and I noticed that for one thing that I use that's very particular to my northern, um, accent in Portuguese is a term "minha filha,"
Okay.
which means my daughter. And I realized that I use this expression in chat in real life with women my age or slightly older in the 30s.
Oh,
But
okay.
after they're like 40, 50, I don't use that anymore.
Right.
I don't use that term. It's like, so this term I use is for younger women, my age, slightly my age, in 20s and late teens, 20s and 30s. I mean, yeah, but it's a thing that's used commonly in the northern regions to express some like kind of like a affection, like someone like this sort of thing. And as someone from the north, I will go into southern regions of Brazil. This is actually more getting more widespread. I've seen people not liking that. It's like, oh, you denigrating the image of the woman by doing that. But it's like something totally subconscious that I just don't notice,
Mhm.
but I don't do that, say, like, no feel with men.
Okay.
I use another term, like, something that my own idiolect that I use is called with men, I usually use the word guerreiro, which means,
Okay.
like, warrior. It's like,
Okay.
"Yeah, hey, guerreiro," like, "Hi, my warrior," or, like, "My
Okay.
king," I call him my king.
So it's kind of like using dude or
Telling you using dude, but it's, like, very
bruh.
bruh. It's kinda like that, but, like, I use this but that's, like, only for me. I would be able to say the same thing for other Brazilians. Probably Brazilians from the North, they probably say that. If you're Brazilian, please tell me what you use because I'm very curious. Um, and another one, that I get fascinated is the idea that, for example, Russians, they they don't address with last names. They use their first name and last name
The first
in the middle
mimic.
in a patronymic name
Right.
as a term of respect.
Right.
Were you weirded out by that in Russian?
That was definitely something that I had to learn.
Yeah,
It's something that they will teach you fairly early on because it's a way of showing respect. You're not going to speak to somebody respectfully if you're only using their first name, and it's kind of weird to just use their last name.
yeah,
But the first name in patronymic is the way we would refer to our Russian instructors, for example,
yeah.
because that was a respectful way of doing it. And some of those things you can be explicitly taught, but some of the nuance is hard to grasp, without actually learning through interaction. At what point do you start to refer to somebody using a more polite form? At what level of distance do you have to have, social distance, or what level of hierarchical distance do you have to be able to show that? Sometimes, somebody could kind of explain that to you, but a lot of it you sort of have to learn in context.